Greetings and salutations. Welcome to this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Before we begin, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share this video with a friend. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. My guest today is a playwright and screenwriter whose work investigates the intersection of history, memory, and identity. They hold an MFA in writing from Northwestern University, MA in English from Middlebury College, and BA in English and Theater from Princeton University. And their plays have been seen on Broadway at Circle in the Square, Circle Reading Series, Off-Off-Broadway, a New York Theater Workshop, New Group, American Theater of Actors, Flea Theatre, and Access Theater. Their work has been named finalists of the Geffen Playhouse Writers Room, BRIC Lab Residency, Lark Playwrights Week, and Screencraft Play Award. And their play, The White Dress, was semi-finalist for the 2018 Bay Area Playwrights Festival and the inaugural Shonda Rhimes Emerging Playwright Award. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Roger Q. Mason.
Hello, how are you?
I'm well. Thanks for doing this. I'm glad we got this.
Nice to meet you.
Likewise, I'm glad we got this to happen. You get a lot of great stuff here. Where'd you get your start? What made you get into playwriting?
Well, I realized when you were doing my introduction that you probably had an older bio of mine because I think the information on it stopped at about 2019.
Oh, goodness.
And I'm only saying that to say that a lot of things happened in the years of pandemia that I think are worthy of filling in.
Please do. Absolutely. Expand.
Yeah, so you had mentioned Circle in the Square, and I think that's a pretty good place to start because that was really a turning point. 2019, I was starting to form my relationship to bicoastalism. I'm from Los Angeles originally, and go back and forth between LA and New York a lot for work.
I was hoping to get you in studio, but I heard you're not coming back till May. So
I won't. Yeah, I won't be back in Los Angeles until May, and then I'll be in town for the summer, and then I'm on the road again. The dates and details of which are not quite ironed out yet, but I'll be back on the road. But 2019 was a bit of a turning point year for me because it was the year that I discovered myself as the writer-performer. In those times before then, all of those accolades and things that you had mentioned before, I was still writing to conform, I think, to a very finite and oppressive system of affirmation and meritocracy in our business, which is how do you write from the page for a readership that is looking for a very specific kind of performance of self and intelligence from the page. And I was very concerned with that at that time. But I sort of started off wanting to be a blues singer, really. I was 12 years old, and we had at this program at our school, I went to Pilgrim School from preschool to 12th grade, and we had this thing called Midday Cabaret, and all of the sort of young aspiring middle school and high school performers, they were gods and goddesses to me, because they were on that stage in Stewart Hall, which is a little rec hall in a 1920s church building in the middle of downtown LA, and they got on that stage and they were free as birds, and they were expressing versions of themselves that represented a kind of self-affirmation and liberation that I loved. And so I wanted to be amongst those people. So I would audition for shows, not cabaret stuff, but also musicals, and I'd get taken out of them. The myth has been told that I was taken out because of a homophobic household. My parents thought that queerness was transferred through performance. And so they didn't want me to be a, quote, sissy ass artist, as it was phrased in the time.
So was the institution taking you out, or were your parents taking you out?
Oh, the family was taking me. Of course, I got into the shows, honey. I always did. But there was a concern about the transference, I guess you could
Well,
say.
hey, hold on, because I'm kind of curious. What, if you don't mind me asking, what year is this, and what in what town?
We're in Los Angeles at the time of this, and it's the sort of mid 90s. But the thing you have to understand about my household is that I grew up in a house with my grandmother and two aunts were born in 1892 to 1900. And my father was born in the 1940s. So I basically lived in a time warp.
Sure.
Which is partially why history plays such an important role in my work now, because it's the world that I grew up in, a world of history and memory, because that was how we marked time and defined our relationships to each other in the world, was through where we had been. Now, another version of the story is that I was overextending myself, but I think that's a stand-in for the fact that I saw an interdisciplinary relationship to life and art and thought making that were beyond various binaries related to time and commitment. And I had always conceived of myself, even as a young person, as somebody who performed, did thought leadership work, and was in some way involved with the creation of art. That was always who I was. And I think I was fighting for a very long time to do that in a multi-hyphenate way.
Okay.
Now, the performer in me was perhaps the most liberated and the most unapologetic and the most uninhibited person. The performer was born in that era and was sort of censored for a long time, first by others and then by myself, because, you know, the culture of respectability would have me do work that was more sort of administrative in nature in the theater. So I did a lot of producing and directing because it was sort of a safe and respectable place from which to still be involved. But I did learn a lot about how you create events and how you really conceive of events for theatrical consumption through those times. So you could say, because what I would do even in middle and high school is I would be an associate producer on a lot of these shows. So you could say I've been in the producing and directing and show business for 20 some odd years. And it wasn't until later that I also had this burgeoning sort of poetic life, because I was on the literary magazine and all of that. And so it wasn't until later, undergrad specifically, that I figured out you could put those things together. You could write and perform for this thing and also build the events. And so this multi-hyphenate was born in that time. Well, in 2019, you know, I'd been to undergrad already. I had done Middlebury's program, as you mentioned. I'd gone to Northwestern in Chicago. And I was starting to travel back and forth for work. The first piece I had in New York at that time was a piece, it was then called Pleasure Men, and it was later called The Pride of Lions. And it was a piece about 5 drag queens that were in Mae West's play, The Pleasure Man, that was censored and closed on Broadway. And we couldn't find anybody to play the Queen from Harlem. So 3 weeks before the presentation at the Flea Theatre in New York, the director looks at me and says, "Honey, you better order some heels because you're getting on stage." And I said, "Really?" So, excuse me. So I got the heels, and then we started rewrites with me in mind as the performer.
Okay, now real quick, I do want to. This story will finish, I promise, because it's fascinating. But you're in New York, right?
I'm in New York right now.
No, but during this production,
during that show, yeah. I was
I'm in New York, which is no shortage of actors. Where's the problem finding somebody to play this role? Obviously, things worked out how it was supposed to, but I find it hard to believe that you couldn't find anybody. So what was the issue?
I think there were a lot of things going on that year. I think it was a very popular year for Black queer performers, and a lot of people were booked.
Okay, fair enough.
I think part of it was that. I think the other thing is it was new, and I was newer in town. And
Okay.
so there's always skepticism around the neophyte. And
Fair enough.
also the material, I'm in a writer's group right now, and every time a reading of mine happens, there's this moment of pause after it finishes. And I used to think it was pause because of its inferiority. And the woman, we sort of really triaged on this matter the other day, the leader of our group. And she said, we're not pausing because it's bad, honey. We're pausing because we know it's excellent and it's complex, and we just don't want to sound dumb. And so I've started to realize that a lot of the pause around my work has to do with an innate challenge of what's easily digestible. And, we all get pushed into corners in our business of wanting to do what's maybe easier. And I've never been easy. I've always been one to identify and embrace discomfort. And I think that even when I'm not trying, even at my most simplistic, what I'm doing on the page and also on stage when it gets manifested in production is a multivalent and rigorous theatrical event that unfortunately we're not always accustomed to seeing or consuming.
How do you push discomfort on the page? How do you put that in your work? Could you have examples of that?
There's a lot of thematic layering that happens. There's also a relationship to language-based performance, poetic expressionism, I call it, that's sometimes challenging on the tongue, but also challenging on the spirit, because it talks about a lot of uncomfortable themes of exploitation, themes of abandonment, loneliness, reaching for joy, themes about intimacy, that private inner life that sometimes make people uncomfortable to talk about or to air publicly.
Is that just because of subject matter or because of the explicit language that you're using?
I would say it's both, because I don't hide around anything.
Sure.
Okay. I used to be a lot more sort of metaphorical and cerebral about things. Not anymore. And I think 2019 was really the year that turned, because suddenly I was on stage myself and I said, well, wait a minute, this is a platform and a forum. And it's got to be entertaining and exciting, but it's also got to move culture forward. It's got to make us face those aspects of the human condition that we want to brush under a rug because they're not comfortable.
Do you still take this as a subtextual approach, or is it just blatant and in your face?
It depends. I don't really plan it ahead of time. I grew up listening to jazz music, and I do consider myself to be a jazz playwright. So I sort of am in the moment, and the moment tells me what it needs to be.
What is that? What a jazz playwright means to you? What is a jazz playwright?
A jazz playwright is somebody who listens and responds to the chord of life as it's being played in that moment, not before, not after, but during, and uses all of their previous knowledge of life, but doesn't prefigure anything. I have the tools that I need, and the most important tool I have is my truth. And then I just sit there and I just start riffing on it. That to me is what a jazz playwright is.
Do you still, after you've riffed and completed a piece of work, do you still go back and do rewrites and edits and all that goodness?
Oh yes, many times, many times. Okay. I'm not advocating for stream of consciousness with abandon. Writing is rewriting. So sure. I'll go through the first time and then I'll go back, but then there's new improvisations, because then we'll come back, we'll bring some actors in. The purpose of the actors sometimes is to watch me act the piece out. So many times that's what they end up doing in the room. I'm like, honey, sit down, let me show you something. That's what they end up doing.
So the heels get ordered, you get on stage.
Heels get ordered, I get on stage and I have the time of my life. And I remember what it's like to perform. And I remember how much joy it brought me.
How long had it been?
It had been it had been officially since high school. I had done, a couple of, one-offs and readings and things. And I did a couple of shows in Long Beach when I first moved back to LA in 2008 after undergrad. But it had been a long time since I had been on stage in a process with that kind of rigor. And so there I was playing Molasses Jones, who's a Harlem queen that doesn't want to sing for free in 1928 Harlem. And she will beat your ass if you ask her to. And the writing changes because it becomes more character driven and a lot more vulnerability based. So I stopped writing from the head and start writing from the root. It becomes a much more experiential and instinctive process, but also a more earnest one.
What expand on that? What does writing from the root mean?
It means writing from a place of what a character really needs and wants in a moment, without premeditation and without judgment, and without the furtherment of a particular theme as embodied by that character specifically.
How do you know that? How do you know where that's at? And when and how do you know that? Is that in the moment as you write?
I sit for a long time with pieces. Now I sit even longer. I'm working on a piece right now about Bayard Rustin's intimate life. And I've sat for a year. And I'm just about to start putting pen to paper, or rather fingers to keyboard.
What does that look like in the process? You've been sitting on this for a year. Are you just making mental notes? Are you writing things down?
I'm listening.
How detailed is this mental process?
I'm listening. I was just in New Orleans, and I was at the Pontchartrain Hotel, and a couple of jazz musicians were playing downstairs in the Bayou Bar, and they were playing a piece, and the drummer started moving his body while he was percussing in a certain way. And I said, oh, that's how it feels to be in that hotel room, Bayard and this lover. That's what they're playing.
What's that feeling?
On the radio. What's that feeling? It's wet, it's sweaty, and it's free, and it's completely in the body. Or sometimes I'll be reading something entirely different, and then there'll be a quote that validates some notion that I had. Aaron Henney, who's, I think, one of the great dramaturgical minds of Los Angeles, once taught a playwriting class. We'd meet at his house, and there'd be many devotees to come to this house because he told us the truth. And what he said was, you're always writing, as long as you are making meaning that's narrative in nature, as long as you're thinking about a character, who they are and what they want and how they're going to get it in this world. You could be shitting your dog. You could be washing dishes. You could be reading a book, whatever you're doing, as long as that thought, that narrative thought is crossing through your mind, then you're still making meaning as a playwright. And that sort of completely destroyed this image of the solipsistic horn-rimmed glasses, brooding, neurotic man that's sitting at the typewriter, putting down the word as he sees it and only as he can do it, on paper to be interpreted as biblical truth in a theater. It sort of destabilizes that image because, one, it makes it a much more tactile and fluid activity. It also makes it collaborative because you're responding to the world. You're responsible to the world. You are responsive in the world. You are listening to somebody on a bus. One of the scenes in my play Lavender Men, early on in the play, it takes place in a drill yard. And it's Elmer Ellsworth, Abe's legal assistant, who was at that time a drill sergeant, busting the chops of his little platoon. And it was that initial sort of verve that attracts Lincoln to him. Well, the language that he uses is actually an eavesdropping. I was, for a time, I would go to the UCLA library, to the MBA school, and use their library to write, because they had very long tables, and it meant that I could spread out unapologetically and just put my script out and just type. And they'd close at 8, so I'd leave at 7 so I could get the shuttle down and get on the bus, 7:20 bus back to Koreatown, where I was living at the time. And as I was walking down, because that day I was going to see a show at Royce Hall. So I was right, in the little courtyard before you get to the front of Royce Hall. And there were some ROTC boys doing a drill. And they were upside down and they had their legs in the air, and their platoon leader was screaming. He was standing on top of them and screaming at them. These boys are sitting there doing handstands, and he's screaming at their crotches. He's screaming right into the burgeoning manhood of these young men. And what he was saying to them to induce them to stay in this handstand longer and do push-ups while doing it, I wrote down. And that became the basis for that scene. So what I'm saying to you is life is our great dramaturg. Mm. And what we have to do is listen. And I think the performer in me learned that, because the performer is a lay anthropologist. The performer is interested in asking why of human nature. Why do you do this? Why do you say that? Why do you eat this? Why do you, fornicate with that? I'm interested in that question. The curiosity of it is the performer in me. And so when I come from that place of curiosity, there's an expansiveness of imagination, and there's also humility. I'm not writing, I'm the channel, I'm the curator. That's really what writing is for me, it's curation. The story was already written. That ROTC man has been doing that for weeks. It was up to me to open my ears and hear his ass, and then interpret how I could use that as an embodiment of education about how America masculates, not emasculates, I said masculates their young, perhaps through miseducation. And that's what we were doing in that scene, but it came out of me looking at a moment, which the next person would say, oh, wow, that's cool. They're the boys. Okay, fine. Or, oh, wow, he's got nice thighs. How old is he? Ooh, and maybe he's not legal. Whatever they would say. But I looked at it and I said, wait a minute, this is the scene for a play. And it's that eye, the training of that ear, the opening of that spirit, the liberation of that root, you see. That's what had to be trained. And that training started in 2019 when I had to get my little ass on that stage in them heels. And so after that, I was on my way home to Los Angeles, and I got a phone call from a woman named Rachel Shuey, who was running a program at Circle in the Square. She said, honey, I need you to get back on the plane and do this reading before the rules change, and I can't bring you in anymore because you're about to be on Broadway. I said, really? I said, when? She said, August. So there we were, May or June. So I had a reading of Lavender Men in Los Angeles at Skylight Theater, and we used that, Lova Holder and I used it to prepare the script to go back to New York, and I was in it. Before I wasn't in Lavender Men. So now I was in Lavender Men, and we did a reading of it at Circle in the Square. It was with Charlie Thurston, who's now on everybody's favorite television shows, honey. I just saw Brother Charlie's doing a new movie. I saw it today on Instagram. Very proud of him. And my favorite, I call her the digital cabaret queen. Garrett Clayton was in it, and it was a sold-out reading, and they just wouldn't leave. It was such a rush. And so there we were in 2019, and I started establishing myself as the writer and performer. And then the pandemic happened. And so what I did during that time, I was honored by Celebration Theater and the the city of West Hollywood with the Chuck Rowland Award, which Del Shores just got this year. And before me, it was Billy Porter. So you see, I'm couched between Billy Porter and Del Shores. So I just want to contextualize my pedigree for you all. You know what I'm saying? But it was a beautiful experience because it started, we did that. And then we did another tribute with the Fire This Time Festival here in New York, digitally. And that sort of started making me think about what kind of work am I writing? Because we would do snippets of these plays. It was the pandemic. So everybody was at home, so we could get everybody to do it, so we all got on Zoom, and it was beautiful to have these little reunions, these little glimmers of light in an era of discomfort and uncertainty. Here we were giving joy, light, and laughter. And I also got involved at that time with Mark Armstrong and Tina Fallon's group, 24-Hour Plays, and that was a great training ground. Because in 24 hours, you suddenly had to write a monologue that would be seen by tens of thousands of people and performed by Wayne Brady. And I did it, I think, 7 times.
Wow.
7 times. So I spent about a year and a half training my mind, writing for actors and writing authenticity and honesty in a very quick and expedient fashion. So you can't rely on anything but the most earnest manifestation of your instrument, because that's all you've got. You've got your root, you've got your instinct. And it makes you make decisions very quickly and also very impactfully, because those things are haikus. If you don't hit people in that first 15 frames, you're fucked, because we're going to turn that shit off. I had tens of thousands of views of those things. And it sort of helped a lot of people around the country learn about me and my work. And I was grateful for those opportunities because they were also a training ground for the writer that I needed to become. And then the sort of things lifted and we went into Lavender Men. And so here I was in a full run of a show. So we did Lavender Men. But I, along the way, had started working on other pieces. I've been very busy working on other plays this whole time, especially during the pandemic. I got quite a bit of work done. And so Lavender Men was both a full production in LA, and we also did a movie of it that is now being submitted around for festivals. So if any of your folks are festival promoters or producers, we're ready for our premiere, darling, and you about to give it to us. Thank you. And we did a couple of short films too. So I've started to do some, film work. So it's been a very interesting trajectory. And I think that the key to it has been just living in curiosity and wonderment and a joy of learning. And those are things that I always associate with the actor version of myself. And that's what's guided me.
How does that transfer to the page, curiosity?
The way it literally transfers to the page is I'll start a scene and I'll know a couple of things about it, and then I'll just see what comes out. I'll just literally see. I don't know what's going to happen in this, and I surprised myself. Usually, there's some logic to it that's perhaps subconscious, but I'm not, formulaically sitting here trying to do something, and it's also interdisciplinary. So sometimes it's scene based, sometimes it's language, sometimes it's movement based. Sometimes we have, because I go to a lot of dance and a lot of orchestral music. They started to recognize me as a regular at LA Phil, and technically a subscriber, because I've bought enough tickets to. If you don't put them in the bin at the same time, they don't call you a subscriber. But literally, the man at the front desk said, "Honey, you've been here every fucking week. You a subscriber? I'm gonna give you the discount." So this time I'm going to actually, subscribe formally, but I'm always there. And the same thing is true here in New York. I'll go to the Joyce all the time because I learned so much from other media. I think we we need to engage more with other media.
What are you learning?
I'm learning that language is not the only tool we have in the theater. I'm learning about relationships to space. I'm learning about emotionality. You know, people go to music to feel things, and they can't describe what they are, and they can't talk about them in any truly intelligible way. They just know how they feel. Can you do the same thing in a play?
Can you?
Absolutely.
How?
By making the audience do some work. If you notice, dance doesn't interpret itself for you. You'll get descriptions of some of the themes, but there's never this stoop to conquer ambassadorship that plays sometimes feel they have to do, explaining all the history and the themes and all this stuff. Music similarly doesn't. It gives you a couple of whispers of what was on the mind of the composer and then allows you to do the work. I think the most dangerous thing we do is mistrust the innate narrative intelligence of our audiences. They come wanting to do the work. They are willing participants in these flights of the imagination. And I think we're so worried about accessibility and digestibility that we sometimes feel like ambiguity and audience thought formation is risky. So the work we do sometimes over-explains itself or serves as its own ambassador. And that's not so in other media. Opera certainly does not come to you. You are expected to come to opera. Now, part of that, I think, is a bit of an elitist, exclusionary system. Oh, you didn't know what it was about? Oh, well, then you just don't come enough. Oh, you weren't here you didn't see Tosca last? My God, But I think the other part of it is that the altruistic version of that story is that there's something universally understood about this that crosses time and language and circumstance, and that we as a collective humanity can have a common experience if we give our audiences the tools to feel that they are able to do that in the room. And that means not explaining ourselves. That means doing things that don't always have a clear, neat conclusion, because life is not clear and neat.
I'm sure that not all your pieces are historical or based on history. Maybe they are. Okay, so the ones that you do, I mean, how much license do you take in that regard, or do you do an extensive amount of research to be as truthful as possible in what was happening at that time?
I read everything because I want to be prepared. I used to be the subject of a lot of naysaying because my work would tell alternative history. I think we're living in an era now of alternative facts where all kinds of lies are being told anyway. So we're looking for some truth or some expansion of the truth that brings healing and unity to the world. And that's where the work, I think, is filling that need civically. But I remember I wrote a piece that was based on my own family history. And it was an Adam and Eve story. It's set in rural Texas about an Irish sojourner girl who had come onto a property owned by a half-Black peach farmer in the 1870s. And there was some audience member, this was about 10 years ago. My father remembers this story better than I do. I tend to block out things that waste my time, like ignorance. But and ignorance without the desire to learn something. And this man was so upset that he just didn't believe that there were Black folks that owned property in the 1800s, and that there was no such thing as mixed race. And I was just like, okay, so do I need to pull out the family album for you? What kind of ocular proof do you need of a version of history and a version of reality that doesn't comport with the fable that makes you feel safe? You see, this is the kind of embracing of discomfort that I'm talking about. I'm not even talking about more uncomfortable things. I'm talking about simple truths. But when you start destroying those, you pick at the whole thing. Because if it's true that Black folks owned property in the 1860s and the 1870s, then it's true that they had agency. If it's true that they had agency, then it was true that they had voting power. They had, then you start going down the line, and all of a sudden, all of the oppressive boxes that keep us in order and keep us ignorant start to dissipate. The most dangerous and important question we can ask in this world is why? And that's exactly what critical race theory and drag are doing. They're making people ask why. Why is it that a man can't wear a dress? Well, he used to, and the Pope still does, but that's permissible because you've been normalized and acculturated into thinking that that's right. But what happens if it's used in other contexts? Well, now that unspools your relationship to manhood. Well, your manhood is used as a means of regulation and voting power. What was it? It was not, originally, it was life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. They took that away because they didn't want everybody to have property. So now all of a sudden, manumission, we now have to start defining the single white property owning man as somebody who can vote. So that becomes a kind of currency. Well, if I put a dress on that man, the work that he spent to carve out that little space of representation gets unspooled because I say that the whole thing is invented. That's very dangerous to say that it's only a paper moon floating over a cardboard sea. That's very dangerous to the order of things in the world. And that danger is exactly the currency which I trade in my work. Why? Because if I don't do it, no one else will. And if I don't do it, then the children won't grow up learning how to think. And if they don't know how to think, then they don't know how to dream. And if they don't know how to dream, then we actually aren't going to progress as a society. Because dreaming is just seeing the future manifested now in your mind while processing the past.
You mentioned that you hadn't been performing for a while in 2019. How did jumping back in and start performing affect your writing?
It changed it entirely. It made it vigorous. It gave it muscle and grit and honesty. It allowed me to be political. Because I was saying it. I had the ability to say things. I could just get up there and say them. That was it.
So are you performing in your own work now? Is that?
Sometimes. I'm now actually choosing what I perform in, because I also want the work to provide opportunities for other people. So the next phase of Lavender Men's life, for example, is to cast somebody else's taffeta. And the reason is very simple. I wrote it as a piece to give work to Black plus size queer folks, not just me, but others around the country and around the world. So I'm now on a crusade to get that play produced around the country so that those girls have work, because I think we deserve to have three-dimensional stories about our hopes and dreams.
What's that process look like right now for you trying to get that work out there?
Well, we're doing readings and we're pitching it around, and there are a couple of things that I can't talk about yet that will be happening for it, and those will hopefully build some momentum to encourage other decision-making bodies, arts administrations, that it's all right to do the play. When one does it, then the others start falling in line, and I get it. but something has to give in order for the dam to break open. So I'm excited about this next phase of life for that piece, because I know that it will give cultural permission for the work to be done elsewhere.
When we first started talking, you had met, and I'm not sure if it was Lavender Men or if it was another piece you were talking about. You mentioned a piece that was originally called something, and then it was changed to something.
Yeah, it was originally called Pleasure Men, and then it was changed to The Pride of Lions, and it was a piece about 1928 drag queens in Mae West's play that she did on Broadway.
So why the name change? Why the title change?
I found out one of the reasons why folks didn't want to do the play, because they felt it was too binary. There was men in the title, and it was a piece about gender expansiveness. And so we changed it to The Pride of Lions, to signify the inclusion that was within the piece. And also make it more expansive thematically, because it's about pride.
You also mentioned writing for 24-hour plays. You did that 7 times, you said.
I think 7.
Okay.
I'm not sure exactly, but yes.
And these are just monologues.
Some of them weren't. Some of them were, one of them had no language at all, which was fun. And it was a 2-person piece. It was sort of a short film. There were a couple that, one of them recently that we did was live, had several people in them. Many of them were monologues, but not all of them.
When you're writing, what's a monologue look like? When you're just going into just you're not writing a full play. You're just writing how is that? What's the process of just of tackling a monologue that's not attached to a full work of art? Not a work of art. That's not fair, because a monologue, of course, is a work of art, but a full piece. It's not attached to anything else. There's no, scene that came before this, a scene that goes after it. You're just writing this lone piece of, 5-minute work that's, with one person.
Well, they were never 5 minutes. Some of them went on for 14 minutes.
Fair enough.
So some of them were quite long. But the other thing is, the key to that was making them to stand on their own, so that all of the given circumstances, the moments before, the decisions made during, and the aftermath were one complete thought. That was actually the key to those works, so that they did stand on their own as their own pieces. They were short works. They were essentially 10-minute plays or short plays, but they all stood on their own. And that was the great challenge of that time, was how do you make this an entirely fulfilling experience with just one person using primarily language to tell a story that had a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Because the question that I've asked in past episodes to playwrights is like, when is it time for a monologue? Now, obviously, this is all you're writing. You're just writing a monologue. So we've never really taken that approach. We've never really discussed writing a monologue for the sake of just being a standalone piece.
Well, I think in those works, we were given a sort of set of parameters, like it was the actor, the skills that they had, and maybe something they were interested in doing, like skipping rope or burning a candle or singing a song. And so those became kind of guiding principles.
So you're writing for somebody specific.
You're writing for somebody specific, and you're also writing a specific occasion that's fictional in nature. Right. So with those specifications, you then have the parameters to sort of build a world, for the piece.
How do you know when you're writing something like that? How do you know when you're done? What's the structure of a work like this?
Well, in the context of the 24-hour plays, you knew you were done because you had to turn it in at a certain hour. Fair enough. You sort of like got what you could done within that time. But how did I know internally that I was done? I just felt complete emotionally. that the journey of this person and all of the obstacles and all of the sort of fantasies of that moment were explored to the best of our ability given the time frame that we had. And with that, we had a full act, and it was pens down and let's see what the actor can teach. There wasn't much rewriting after a first read in those occasions. So as a result, you had to go on instinct a lot. And I got pretty good at figuring out how to write a complete event. You just have to scale back the scope of the event. Part of it is scaling back. Many of these pieces are about resolving a particular dilemma or discussing a particular moment in this person's life, so that it's a fulfilling journey from beginning to end in a compact experience.
What do you think what was the most beneficial thing that you took away from your studies that really just resonated in your playwriting when you were studying?
Well, I'm still studying, I think we all are. And I don't say that flippantly. I really mean that if we think we have arrived at a certain manifestation of ourselves and that we won't grow any further after that, then we've essentially stopped evolving cognitively. We're not making new synaptic connections. We're not learning new skills. And that marks the death of our mind. So I always am seeking learning. Each piece that I do is a new aesthetic experiment. So last night I had a great epiphany on a play. I thought I was writing a solo show, and it's a piece about Juana Maria, who was the lone girl of San Nicolas Island. And so of course it was a solo show because she's by herself. But then I realized, wait a minute, this is a piece about how other people corrupt this woman. So how can you let it be a solo show for as long as it needs to be until it's not? And then I learned, okay, now this is not the form. The form is not solo show. The form is about someone seeking to return to aloneness because the world is too much, And so you'll use other people, but it's still that singular person's journey. And that all happened last night. So usually what will happen is I'll find a shape or a ritual, whatever the ritual of the piece is. And then that will guide me through it. And I typically meditate. That year that I spend meditating on projects is to find that. Sometimes it happens sooner. Sometimes it happens later. Many people have influenced me and my work, and in studying them and their work, I've gained a great deal. I suspect you want to hear some collegiate triumph story, and I will offer this. I was in a program at Northwestern that was interdisciplinary. And one of the things that we did was we studied screenwriting. And Spencer Parsons was the teacher at the time. What he did in terms of encouraging us to dream beyond the confines of physics on the page, that literally screenwriting was about getting into the metaphysical mind and spirit of a character. How they sweat, what their saliva tastes like, what they're looking at 2 doors away, and how that makes their blood beat. That translated for me in terms of how to write interiority, a person's inner life, even on stage. And one of the things that's become interesting to me as a playwright is the external expression of interior life. How do we dramatize psychology? How does someone feel, and how can we put language and embodiment to that? So I think that's definitely one of the great influences.
What's interior life? What is that?
The interior life is the life that exists in the mind and spirit of the person. It's sometimes the one that you don't see. You know, it's who they are to themselves when they look in the mirror. My mother was in the board and care business, and she had a client that would go to the adult care center, and she had a complaint. So she lodged it with the nurses on staff. She said, "There's a girl, she's laughing at me." And they said, "Oh my goodness, we got to find this girl." So they went. She couldn't find her. And the next time she said, "That girl's still laughing at me." They said, "Okay, well, show her to us." And she went to the bathroom. They said, "Where is she? There's nobody in here but you." She said, "No, she's here." And she looked in the mirror. And she said, "That girl, she's laughing at me. She calls me fat." Mm-hmm. That's interior life. That's interior life.
You mentioned, or you said that when I asked the question about what you took away from your collegiate experience, that I wanted some collegiate triumph. But the reason why I asked that question, it's come up in a few episodes, and the reason why I ask it is not so much for. I guess I'm looking for lack of a better phrase, justification for going into playwriting in academia. Is it necessary?
I don't know anymore. I don't know anymore. I have seen a lot of triumphs, and I've also seen a lot of broken winged birds. I certainly took the long road to healing from various educational experiences. I think what liberal arts education can do in general, I won't pinpoint which school or which part of my journey, I will speak more globally. I think what a liberal arts education can do, at least for somebody that's pursuing Western success, is that it can make you think in an interdisciplinary way. It makes you inquire about the world in a way that makes connections between seemingly disconnected disciplines and ways of thinking and points of view, and putting them together through your curatorial system known as your mind, your perspective, to come up with some idea about the world. And that curation of the different parts of your experience that you put together, that curation is what we would call voice, point of view, perspective. And I think that makes the writer, that voice, because how I look at a particular set of events is very different from how you would look at it, and how you would look at it is different from the next person. And the way that I synthesize that information is how I define myself. The information is available to all who are able to see it and hear it. And it's how you take it that I think defines you. Now, information is not available to everyone. Not all information is. There are educational gaps, there are access gaps, and I think we would be remiss not to mention those as well. But for those to whom the information is available, what defines their voice is how they curate a response to that stimuli. And that skill set, I think, is what I took from education.
For those that aren't familiar with the term, because it's never come up in the past episodes. When you're saying interdisciplinary, what is that for people that may not be familiar with the phrase in the academic world?
Let me go to Oxford Dictionary for y'all. No, because I'm not going to give you some bullshit answer. Let's do this properly. Really?
We can be legit, but we can also take an answer of what that means to you as well. Well,
I'm going to give you both, you see.
Okay, fair enough. Let's do it.
I'm going to give you both.
All right, great.
We will use this. It is the combination or study of multiple academic disciplines in one activity It draws knowledge from several fields, including sociology, anthropology, psychology, economics, and it is about creating something by thinking across boundaries.
Okay.
Now, I will tell you what it means to me. What it means to me is seeing life as a symbiotic and interconnected whole. It is about holism. Everything is connected. Everything is related. Everything responds to something else. Nothing exists in a bubble. And so interdisciplinary art making is a response to the life that I'm receiving that acknowledges all of the different perspectives, times, points of view, needs, wants, ways of telling that make life one whole. It is an expansiveness. It is a full and unbridled use of my imagination. If I'm only doing dialogue-based work, I'm using a very small percentage of what's possible. That's why I go to dance. You get up there and you see a solo, a woman in a red dress comes out, and the dress is 10 feet off the ground, by the way, and she's sitting here confined but doing this dance. And all of a sudden your mind starts thinking about, what is that? You know, I saw a piece, I think it was called Fraternity by River North Dance Company. And it was about how young boys get socialized out of homosociality, meaning the fraternity, the feeling of closeness, bros, I guess you would call it colloquially, this feeling of affinity between men, and how the Western world socializes them into thinking that male closeness is sinful in some way because it leads through osmosis to homosexuality or other fluid relationships to the binary. God rest its heart and soul. A piece of mine called The White Dress would never have existed if I hadn't gone to the Harris Auditorium in Chicago and seen what later I found out was the last major choreographic work of that company, because the artistic director and choreographer was suffering from a degenerative nerve issue. And so he was composing this piece only from his wheelchair. His last piece, or one of his last pieces, was about the erosion of freedom by society based on genitalia and the policing of the closeness of that genitalia-based identity. And so I wrote a play, a coming-of-age piece, about how a young genderqueer person is socialized into thinking that who they are is wrong. And it came because I saw that. I took my own questions about the world, and they were buttressed by this other artist, so I knew that I was not alone in that inquiry. And then I put those things together in some symbiotic dialogue, and I developed a new idea from it, interdisciplinary.
So I don't want to say you're on the fence about it then, as far as the academic approach to playwriting goes. So if somebody was not taking that approach, is that the answer for the interdisciplinary life, to apply it to playwriting, to where it's like, okay, if you're not going to take the academic approach, then go to these different mediums, go to these different life experiences to pull these from, whether it's going to the opera, whether it's going to a jazz performance, whether it's going to a ballet or a dance. Are you pulling from all of those things? Or how can somebody who's not going to take the academic route, how can they experience an interdisciplinary approach to playwriting? Mentorship and courage.
All that happens in an academic setting is they have you sit around a table and discuss what you were already thinking. Maybe you read a couple of articles that buttress a few points, but you're learning experientially from people who are practicing it in the field. And so mentorship is really one of the most important allies of a playwriting education. Having people to show you yourself is perhaps the strongest tool that you have. Because all you're doing is journeying closer and closer to your own truth. And that is a truth that you had at 12. You were already that person. Most of the time, you were already there. The world just beat that shit out of you. It made you feel whatever it did, ashamed, embarrassed, worried about the future, whatever it was.
What should one look for in a mentor, and how does one go about finding one?
Somebody who sees you for you and doesn't want to make you a mini version of them, or doesn't want to make you into some societally acceptable thing, but somebody who says, this is who you are, and let me help you be the strongest version of that. And I think the way you do that is you meet people, you know, and you talk and you ask questions, and you see who's willing to answer your questions, who's kind to you, you know, who sees what you see or sees what you're going to see 10 years from now, aspirationally, inspirational. You know, I reach for something, I see someone who sees it, or somebody that I can become like, and that tells me that that person will guide me. You know, that's what I think is the key.
How did playwriting affect your performance? I asked the reverse already. So, and how performance affected your playwriting? How did playwriting affect your performance?
Well, I started thinking structurally about how a character goes from one thing to another, and what are the tools that they use along the way, and how do I activate those tools, and how do I pace them? I think narrative pacing is perhaps one of the most important things that playwriting teaches the actor.
What is narrative pacing?
How do you get from one thing to another without burning yourself out, or without showing your hand too early? Because as Lady Chablis once said, I don't unwrap my candy. You know, I mean, don't unwrap your candy too early.
How do you do that in playwriting?
That's what the rewriting is for. You take things out. You know, because you want to get there. At least for me, I want to get done. I want the draft to be over because I'm done already. You know, part of me, and then the other part, languages and loving. You know, being there, and you know, all those mushy, delicate, floral things that happen to human beings in vulnerable states of unknowing. You know, and so I think you just take things out that reveal too much, and you find places for them later. That's the simple version. There's more to it than that.
Fascinating. What in your mind is the most important, I'm going to say aspect of playwriting, but the most important tool, you know, is it character? Is it dialogue? Is it?
None of that.
Okay.
It's the people. You are writing this for a performance event. And so there's humility is actually your most important tool. I am writing this for other people. I'm writing this for actors to perform. I'm writing this for a director to guide embodiment, for designers to give auditory and sensory signals that help an audience comprehend it in the way we're interpreting it this time. But most importantly, I'm not writing this alone. I am the culmination of my lived experience. I am the education that I received through rehearsal, and the changes and adjustments that I learned through a preview and through a run. Nothing is precious. Everything can change, and everything can go. And that kind of fluidity comes from trusting yourself. You know, we often hold on to things because we feel we have to defend ourselves, because we feel our selfhood or our legitimacy is somehow at risk. So if you know that you got it, and that it won't go away because you were wrong once, how hard is it for people to admit they were wrong? It's very hard for some people to admit they were wrong, or I don't know, or I need help. These are all of these same human questions come into playwriting. It's no different. There's no strange, that nothing different happens in Bohemia than what happens on Main Street. Let me just assure you, it's all the same.
So when you're writing, how do you, when you say you're writing for other people, you're writing for actors, you're writing for the audience, you're writing for the director, how are you doing that consciously? How are you doing that? How are you aware of those
subtle.
things?
It's subtly in the back of my mind at this point, because I practice it and I do it all the time. I'm not consciously thinking about it.
Okay. So if you were, like, what are you calling yourself out about, I guess? It's like, oh, wait, the audience isn't going to like that, or that's going to be difficult for the director, or, the actor. What are those things that,
well, I'm not calling myself out. I'm calling myself in. I'm saying what's exciting for the director.
okay.
What will bring the audience some clarity in this moment? What is something that an actor doesn't always get to do that would be interesting? I was listening to a Tony Bennett song, and I was like, this is a simple ass song. But then he has one note that he sings. Oh, he says, I think the lyric is, and on, and on, and on, and on. And on that word on, he just holds that note for about 30 seconds and then does it again, and then does it again. And I'm like, oh, okay, they wrote this to showcase his vibrato. Got it. They wanted to show his lung support. That was the purpose of this song. Got it. Because it's a simple ass song until that moment. And I'm like, oh, that's fucking brilliant. Because you held that shit until the end of the song. And then we realized, oh, wait, he can sing, y'all. And imagine live, he's doing it, and all of a sudden he's riffing, and he's going, so it comes from that place. Calling in, not out. Everybody else is going to call us out. Let me call myself in. That's how I feel about it.
Is there shame is probably not the right word. Is there shame in simplicity? Is there anything wrong with simplicity? No,
because simple can be very complex, as I'm learning, depending on how your mind works. Because I think I'm doing things very simply. They're simple to me, but it turns out to be a mind fuck for a lot of people. And I'm certainly not trying to contrive of these, of these things in this way. I'm just living my life and making meaning to the stimuli I'm given in the world.
Which market do you find is more accessible to you as far as New York and Los Angeles go, as far as playwriting? Or is there another market that you find that's even more accessible than those?
I'm open for business now. So every market is accessible if you're persistent and consistent enough. And it really does take those two skills as well as resilience. Because, I left Chicago in 2016. And, and I've been trying to develop inroads back there in the theater scene ever since. And, it looks like some stuff is moving now. What year will it be? 2024, 25 season, so almost 10 years in the making, and it's just about being resilient and holding yourself through that process.
What are the steps that you're taking to get your work out there?
Well, I've got an agent now, honey, so she does a lot of this stuff. But I'm still on the road. I'm on tour right now. I call it a tour, because I've got several readings coming up, and I'll talk to you all about that, because I suspect, like any talk show, I got to sell my book, so I will.
We'll definitely get to that. So real quick, because you got an agent, which is fascinating. That's wonderful. Congratulations. So what How does that work? What's the process in landing an agent for all of our listeners?
First of all, it's not something to congratulate, because it's not necessarily a marker of any change in you that you have to. It just means that you're at a point now where you need someone to help you negotiate your way through the business.
Okay.
And the big mistake of writers is thinking that they're working to get the agent as some signal that their work has gotten better or that they've achieved something. Getting the agent doesn't mean that. It just means that you need somebody to negotiate the money and the per diems. It means that you're working. So it's a very humbling thing, actually, to get an agent, because once you are at that place with your work, you're not thinking about, am I good enough? You think about, okay, shit, I done missed that damn flight. I got to call them on the phone and tell them I won't be at that first rehearsal. That's where your head is. This is business, honey. Mm-hmm. This is business. This is show business. At that point, that's where your brain is. But, what I love about my agent is that we understand that it's more than negotiating contracts and trying to get hotel reimbursements. We understand that this is a story that we're developing, and that we are working together to build a life in the theater and architect a career. And it's about establishing relationships, following up on them, and playing the long game. So there's a lot of strategy. There's a lot of self-advocacy. There's a lot of visibility work, goodwill touring, so to speak, that's involved with it, at least in the way that I do it.
What's goodwill touring?
Going to the reading, talking to the public, shaking hands and kissing babies. The same shit that you do in any political campaign. We trying to get to the White House, honey. It's the same thing. It's all about being a people person and letting folks know that my grandmother used to say, well, you need to walk into a room and make sure that everybody knows that you are happy they are there. And I do that. I try and touch in some positive way every single person that I encounter in a room, and for no other reason than just to celebrate their humanity. Because I think people are fascinating. I think they are our teachers, they are our mentors, and they are our inspiration.
So let's go to it. What are you working on?
Well,
what's happening?
Well, what's happening is I'm in New York, and I've got 2 readings coming up. One of them is called The Pink, an intimacy ritual, and it's going to be at Primary Stages. They're in residence at 59 East 59th Theaters in New York, and that'll be on April 3rd at 7 p.m. Eastern. And then my other showing, which people will learn about later on, is a piece called Waiting for a Wake. And I'll explain both of them in a moment. And that's going to be on the 21st of April at 4 p.m. And we'll be at Open Jar Studios for that. So The Pink is a 2-hander that's just a one-night stand that lasts until the morning after. And it's based on a couple of love affairs of mine that I've had, and some that I wish I had had, that where 2 people are seeking a closeness and an intimacy and a time stopping that only touch can provide. And, it sort of is inspired for me by Terrence McNally's work, particularly Frankie and Johnny at the Clair de Lune. I just found that piece, this grasping to make the night stay and the sun to keep at bay, which of course is the subject of many a couplet from the 15 and 1600s, all of these post-coital sonnets. But there's something real about it, that desire to be really seen. I mean, when you're in bed with somebody, you're at your most honest and vulnerable. You can't hide anything. And I think there's liberation in that, but it's also frightening. And I think we crave that. We crave that connection as human beings. And so that's what that piece is about. And then Waiting for a Wake is my contribution to the American family drama genre. It's about a family similar to mine, Black and Asian family that's fallen gentry, as I call them. Mm-hmm. And they live in this 100-year-old house where the sink has fallen into the basement. So literally the kitchen sink drama has fallen apart. And then it causes all of them to sort of renegotiate their relationship to codependence and entrapment because they're stuck together until somebody leaves. So, I mean, the obvious sort of parent text for that are Long Day's Journey into Night and a little bit of Glass Menagerie. And, Look Homeward Angel is a story, the idea of someone leaving the nest. But also, I think it's so deeply rooted in this story of my own family and families like it, Black and Irish families that made the Great Migration and moved to LA in order to form a better life for themselves, and the erosion of that life over the decades since the 1940s. And then, of course, what it means for my mother or mothers like her who come from Asia during the remittance movement in the 1980s to look at this land of opportunity and see people perhaps squandering it, So it's that tension between class, race, identity, and it ultimately leaves us with somebody leaving. And then the social order of the house has to reform. And I've been threatening to write that play since I was 24, when I was at UCLA in Leon Martel's writing class at the UCLA Writers Program. I would do it in the evenings. And I'd sit down and write, or try to, and I'd start vomiting. I couldn't start, and I was 24. And so, I lived another 12, 13 years, and now here I am finally ending that story for me. It's healing, to write this play. I always knew that I was going to write myself into independence and self-sufficiency. And much like the character in the piece that's, a fashion designer that's in a very financially abusive codependent relationship, because who's funding fashion but the parents, honey, with these kids? I mean, there's this dream that if I can just get seen, then I won't need to depend on you. And that is a dream of so many young people. What is it? Especially, I don't know if you remember that Time magazine article. They call them tweeners. That was the term. Now it's just become normalized. But, back then they were noting this strange trend of people, getting out of undergrad and then moving back home. And they were called tweeners. Then they called it failure to launch syndrome. They've called it everything under the sun. It's called the destruction of the man in the gray flannel suit. The notion of this 9-to-5 life that offers you job security and a pension and a house note to pay for the rest of your days, and the security supposedly to do it. What did they call it today? The Senate was saying that Social Security is an entitlement. Not a right, but an entitlement. So the very system upon which a generation built its social mores is falling apart in front of it. And so we're in the middle of a great economic upheaval and redefinition. And, I would be remiss not to say that the piece is about money and about our changing and tempestuous relationship to money. and how that destroys families and reorders them. You know, what is the number one cause of divorce in this country? Money. You know, that's what that piece is about.
You've got 2 readings.
Yeah.
So what's the purpose of a staged reading? Why are they so beneficial? And why do playwrights want to do those opposed to seeking out a production as fast as they possibly can?
Oh, don't get us wrong. We want production.
Sure, of course. But some people want to put the cart before the horse, so they might not see the benefits of putting on a stage reading.
I think you put on a staged reading with a certain question in mind.
Okay.
I don't think you see a staged reading as a production, and you don't see it as a landing point or some mark of achievement. You see it as a means to an end.
Okay.
And I think that our business, and I'm certainly not saying this of these companies that I'm working with, these companies are marvelous.
Sure.
And understand this process very well. But, they used to talk about people getting swallowed up by the development mill in the American theater because it's an illusion and a distraction. The reality of the situation is, per capita, there's maybe a couple hundred slots in the country available to production. So how do you keep the machine running? How do you keep these writers going? Well, you offer them readings. You offer them the hope of one day maybe being produced. Sometimes knowing full well that you won't be the one to do it, or that play may not be it. So, I'm a very active member at the Dramatists Guild, and we talk about empowering the writer. How do I take the reading and make it what I need it to? And part of that is saying it is being a little bit transactional and a little bit utilitarian. What does this play need at this phase in its development? And how can testing the blueprint through embodiment? You notice I've used embodiment a lot in this talk, and it's important because we're not just writing novels. We're writing, the language we're using should inspire movement and physicality on a stage in 3 dimensions. And we have to remember that, we are in a literary context, but we're also not exclusively literary in our work and our endeavors. So at that point in a process, you identify what exactly do you need, and then you gear the reading towards that. Now, in the case of these 2 pieces, I'm using the time before the readings to do the rewrites because I'm trying to sell these 2.
Sure.
We ready to put this stuff up. and I've told everybody, I'm here to make a sale. The store is open. We open it at 7 p.m. We're going to be closing at 9, and we will call you for feedback. Did you enjoy your customer service experience? And if so, give us 5 stars in the form of a date and a run schedule. That's how I am at this point, with those pieces. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes I know a piece isn't ready. I've got another reading in May. We know it's developmental in nature because the show's going up later. But a playwright should always know that their work deserves to be produced. And every endeavor that they pursue should be geared towards getting that eventual truth to happen. Everything we do, every step we take is towards that. We're not here just writing in our journals in the attic upstairs for our self-pleasure, although there's power in that too. Mm-hmm. I think the most sincere form is when you write and you enjoy what you're doing yourself. That's powerful. But the context in which we are writing is performance work. We are writing for the sake of performance. So we should never lose sight of that end goal. That is the reason for the season.
Where can people find your work?
Well, you can come to 59 East 59 on April, what is it? What did I say? April 3rd at 7 p.m. or April 25th. You can also follow me on Instagram. It's at rogerq.mason. I don't use Twitter as much, but you could find me on there. It's just my name, Roger Q. Mason. And you can how else can you find my actual work?
Yep.
You can message me on there, and I will put you in contact with my agent, and we will happily send you stuff.
Wonderful. I love it. Roger, thank you so much for coming on. I'm glad we got this set up and found the time to do it. I know that we both had a little bit of scheduling things that kept us from doing this earlier, but I'm glad we made it happen.
Thank you very much for having me, James. And it's a pleasure to meet you and an honor to be on your show.
Well, I'm looking forward to attending your reading when you come to LA.
Well, I may have something in LA in the fall.
I hope so.
Peace of Mind. So hope to see you and your fans there.
Looking forward to it. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Again, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share this video with a friend. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. And in the meantime, and until we see each other again, keep writing.